Hey everyone, welcome to the Self Control Show. This is the essential podcast for every man seeking mastery over his own life. Here, we're going to delve deep into the art and science of self control, self regulation, and the intricate workings of the nervous system. Here's your next episode. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. Today, I've got a great topic. It's near and dear to my heart as a new parent, and that is talking about like kids and why sometimes it's so difficult to deal with, big behaviors or bad behaviors, as a lot of parents call it. I'll put air quotes around that and really dive into like what is going on physiologically for your kid when they do something like, hit another kid or say bad words or, have temper tantrums, and break that down to you from a nervous system perspective and help. I'd like to do is help normalize and bring some context to like why that behavior happens, and mostly because um, it can feel really, I don't know, shameful sometimes when our kids act out, and it's like we can get into that spiral. It's like, am I doing a bad job? It's like, is there something wrong with me? um, all the things. So anyways, that's what my main goal of this episode is, to really help you understand that your kid's bad behavior is normal and really what's going on underneath it. And once you really understand what's going on for them, that will allow you to choose a new perspective to these, seemingly sometimes uncomfortable situations, which will allow you to take a different approach and hopefully have a different result for your kids. And of course, that will lead to better relationships as they get older. And, the hope is that, when they don't need you anymore, they actually want to be your friend. At least that's my goal, is like eventually I want my kid to like want to hang out with me and, look for me for support, and still want to use me as an asset, when they're not dependent on me anymore financially and all the things. Okay, so let's get into it. A common thing that comes up, especially on my social media, is, and like, where I really get into the weeds on this with people on like Instagram, is I hear, predominantly men, sometimes women, talk about disciplining your kid. And it's like, man, to discipline your kid, you really have to have a deep, nuanced understanding of what's actually happening for them, in order to properly address the root cause. Otherwise, if you just blatantly or blanketly discipline a kid, let's say your kid hits another kid and you put them in timeout, they think that kids have an egocentric view of the world. In other words, they think it's all about them, which makes sense. They don't have a prefrontal cortex or the understanding of how to properly place themselves in the world. So if something is going on within them or in their environment, they take it on as it's their fault, right? If mom and dad are arguing, I don't know, this is may or may not be something that you had the experience of, but as a kid, when you see mom and dad argue, you can tend to say, oh man, they're arguing, like, did I do something wrong? Right? Even though like we know that that's not true. Um, that's how it feels as a kid. So when you're going to discipline your kid, you have to be very intelligent and careful about like how you do it, or there's a good possibility that your kid might take that on as shame. And what does that lead to? Is, generally speaking, a harsh inner critic. Anybody out there have a harsh inner critic? It's like, I know I did. And why that happens is we get stuck by ourselves to deal with these big emotions, and we have parents that expect us to know. We don't have the capacity to be able to live up to our parents' expectations, right, in a certain way. So then we get in trouble again, and we have this like negative reinforcing loop of, you should be able to do this, you can't do this, why can't I do this, I must be bad. And that happens over and over and over and over and over again, to where eventually we're like, oh my gosh, like I can't feel this feeling because whenever I feel this feeling, something bad happens. And then we end up repressing or suppressing ourselves. And that could look like, oh, my kids are really well behaved. It's like, are they really well behaved, or are they just like completely suppressing parts of themselves because it's not safe to express? So let me dive into this, getting back to the idea of my kid hitting another kid. And it's like, what is happening there? Right. Well, I operate based on the assumption that every kid is good, right? Inherently good. Everybody is inherently good. We want to do good. We don't want to be mean. We don't want to do bad things, right? Because we see how that makes other people feel. I haven't really met a person or a kid who does something in an emotion and like they don't feel bad for it, right? They don't show remorse. There are very few people out there. Sociopaths, right, are pretty much the only people that don't have that type of wiring. So a kid already feels bad about it. Now, the key is understanding why they did the thing, right? So in the case of a kid hitting, little Johnny gets his toy taken away because Sally took his toy. What's happening when that happens is they have a surge of emotion. They have probably a physical sensation that happens in them. And it is way beyond their capacity to actually regulate and understand. So sometimes that comes out in their physical action. And why that is because up until the age of 25, you do not have a prefrontal cortex, right? And that forms at varying degrees as you get older, right? It's not like all of a sudden it pops online and it's just there. You have, um, uh, as you get older, you get more and more and more capacity to your prefrontal because it just like grows exponentially over the years. So like between like and age 0 to age 10, you have about 20% capacity. So if you just take the numbers at face value, that means that you have the ability to have impulse control, to regulate your own emotions, to make smart decisions, to delay gratification, all the things 2 out of 10 times, right? So 20 out of 100 times you're able to do the right thing. But most parents would say, or at least hold the posture that, like, oh, you've done it once. So that means that you know how to do it. If you don't do it the same way that you know how to do it moving forward, well, that just means that you chose poorly, right? But, if you've listened to episode 3, the foundations of self control, the upside down stoplight. What happens when little Johnny's toy got taken away is like, well, guess what? That's a perceived threat. That means you're in yellow. So when you're in yellow, it's like, guess what? Your prefrontal's off. So not only do you have a fraction of your prefrontal that is going to help you regulate the emotions that you're experiencing as a 10-year-old, you are in a state where even as adults, you have little to no access of prefrontal and make poor decisions. So yeah, of course, your kids are not going to make very smart decisions when they're in yellow because they have zero awareness to that. But most parents will not understand this and discipline their kids without the awareness that, like, oh, my kid doesn't know. So it's like, yeah, but then Jason, like, what do? I can't just have my kids hitting kids. Yes, you are absolutely right. So what I always tell parents is like, you take your kid out of the situation, you take them out of the stimulus or the threat in this scenario, and you help them regulate their emotions, right? So instead of like, oh my God, my kid is bad, it's like, no, your kid is just dysregulated. Your kid is just experiencing a perceived threat. Their little to no prefrontal cortex is offline. They experience big emotions. And guess what? Their way of dealing with that was lash out and hit, right? If they had a prefrontal cortex, then maybe they would say, hey, Sally, that's not very nice. That's my truck. I don't appreciate you taking my truck. Give that back, please. And if she doesn't give it back, it's like, okay, I'm going to go get an adult to help me facilitate this. It's like not very many kids do that. Okay. So your kid is just dysregulated. So you remove them from the situation and you help them regulate. And you can do that by breathing, right? And it's like, oh, Johnny, let's take a few deep breaths. Tell me what happened, right? And then little Johnny's probably going to be crying and mad at Sally because he took his truck. And you say, yeah, I understand. That makes sense why you're so upset. So it sounds like you're feeling upset. Are you feeling upset, Johnny? Yeah, I'm feeling upset. That makes sense. And again, it's like validating and making it okay to be upset allows the emotions to move through the body. It allows you to come back to a state of calm. And once you get the sense, their breathing changes, they stop crying, and their like limited prefrontals back online, you can start to get into reasoning and problem solving because they now have access to the smart part of their brain. Because doing this without this first step of regulating your kid, again, because you've listened to episode 3, they're offline. They aren't able to access cognition. You need prefrontal to access cognition. If you've only got 20% of your prefrontal formed, let's just say at age 10, well, dude, you need the whole thing to be able to maybe have it stick, right? So you've taken them out of the situation. You've helped them regulate by like, hey, let's go for a walk. Let's take some deep breaths together. Tell me about what happened. Making sure to say like, oh my gosh, like that makes sense. Like it sounds like you were really upset. Helping them be able to put words to their emotions and connect the feelings to what they're feeling. Ooh, what was that like for you? Did you feel did you feel hot? Did you feel like some pressure in your chest? Like give them little clues as to like, oh my gosh, yeah, I did feel a body sensation. Oh my gosh, I did. Yeah, I did feel upset. Oh my gosh, that's what upset feels like. This is what you're training in them to start to recognize the early signs of what it feels like to be upset, right? Oh man, when I'm upset, I start to get tingling in my arms, or I start to get this burning in my chest, and my breathing increases. Obviously, at age 10, this is going to be a difficult thing to do, but this is what you're training, right? And then after they calm down, you can talk to them in the reasoning aspect, say, hey, I understand that you're really upset, but I can't let you hit somebody else, right? That's not safe. I don't want you to get hurt, and I don't want them to get hurt. And usually kids are going to say, yeah, I know, mommy or daddy. I didn't mean to hit him, right? You hear that all the time. Like, I didn't mean to hit him. I didn't want to hit him. It's almost like something took them over, which makes perfect sense, right? When you're in yellow, you're in fight or flight, you are perceiving threat, whether that's like a real physical threat or like a threat could be, hey, at age 10, somebody taking your favorite toy, right? That's threatening to them in their world. So when you start to be able to understand this at this deep of a level, all of a sudden, dude, it's not about you as a parent. It's like this is going to happen and it's going to happen a lot. It has nothing to do with you as a parent, right? Because your kid has no prefrontal cortex, they are not going to have impulse control. They are not going to be able to regulate their own emotions. That is your job as the parent. And being able to anchor into understanding like, oh wow, I'm not a bad parent, my kids aren't bad, they just need to learn skills. And it's like, maybe I need to learn skills. Because what happens in you when they do a bad thing? Does your chest get tight? Is there a pit in your stomach? Do you have physical sensations that flow through you? Do you have emotions that come up? What are your thoughts and your feelings about those thoughts? Do you start to feel shame? Do you start to feel anxious? Do you start to have judging thoughts? It's like all of those things would be considered the things that you have to work on. Because here's the other way, right? When we act from a place of shame and like, what's wrong with my kids? And, we react instead of acting from a state of regulation, cool, calm, and collected. We usually react from emotion without our prefrontal cortex. So what does that mean? Well, usually we get upset and our kids perceive that as scary. And it's like, oh my gosh, when I did this thing, mom got mad, dad got mad, I got in trouble. But they're not able to connect that to I experienced an emotion and I made a bad choice because my prefrontal cortex was not online and I expressed that emotion in a poor way. They're like, oh my God, when I feel this way, I get in trouble. I can't feel this way because I get in trouble if I feel this way. And they start demonizing emotions and they start repressing emotions when emotions aren't safe to experience and they aren't taught how to experience emotions. Well, they're like, I better not feel them because when I do bad things and I'm bad and I get in trouble, right? And that's not the cycle that you want for your kid, because then what happens is like then they learn like, hey, I can never be angry. Well, guess what happens if you can never be angry? You can and you never learn how to express anger in a healthy way. Well, people just start walking all over you and you don't have boundaries and you turn into what people would call a people pleaser. Does that sound familiar? Right? You start putting other people's needs in front of your own because, hey, anger is not safe to feel and you don't know how to properly express it. So it's better to just let that person do what they want, even though you're really angry about it, because every time in your past that you've tried to express anger hasn't gone too well. You've gotten in trouble and you've been told you're bad and it's just all not good. So better to just suppress it. And I don't know, if you guys resonate with that and if you're a current people pleaser, but it is a very, very, very slippery slope that tends to lead to a lot of resentment and not pursuing and going after the things that you want in life. A lot of times it'll lead to not being able to properly express your needs in relationships with your family, your friends, at your work and job, all the things. So, and that's just one example. So, and this episode isn't meant to shame you if you're not doing it this way. It's really meant to shed new light on an experience where, there could be a lot of frustration around that. And even if you have well behaved kids, it's like, just opening the door to like, why might that be? And it's like, do your kids shut down? Or do they freely express and then you help them regulate their emotions? Again, um, this is all like super new neuroscience, by the way. So even if this is brand new stuff, it's brand new stuff for a lot of people. And hopefully this kind of sheds a little more light on like what's going on for your kid in those tough situations. My 2 cents is always you want to regulate the emotions, then relate, and then reason, whether that's with an adult or a kid, but it's especially important for a kid because they just don't have the ability to regulate their emotions at all. Because remember, no PFC, no prefrontal cortex. So, as always, guys, thanks for listening. Hopefully, this episode was helpful. If you're interested in coaching with me one on one, you can check the link in my bio. Book a free discovery call with me to learn more about what that looks like on my Calendly. And that's available on my Instagram, Jason Schinzer Coaching, on my website, jasonschinzercoaching.com. All that stuff will be in the show notes. And yeah, I help men and women reclaim self-control, regulate their nervous system, and ideally help create a happy marriage. And that's all I got for this time. Thanks for listening. Catch you next one.